So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure and great honor to be with you, such an accomplished and distinguished audience today. I'm going to talk for about maybe 30 minutes, 40 at most, but at any time, feel free to stop me, ask me questions, because the interaction among us is the most valuable thing, I believe. So I'm going to talk about the Draghi report. I will make my comments in two parts. First, about the general nature of the Draghi report, and then I will delve a little bit more into state aid, which is very central. But then towards the end, I will also talk specifically about mergers, what I think the Draghi report is saying about mergers. And this is a little bit my battle horse. I will talk about mergers in the telecommunications sector because the Draghi report is very specific about a few industries, including telecoms. And to anticipate my views, I think that in that context, Draghi gets it very wrong. So he's very right in many aspects, but he's also quite wrong in some specific aspects. So the Draghi report has been a bomb in Brussels and in Europe. He basically is saying up front that Europe has many problems with productivity, with growth, with sustainability of the European model. So is not attacking the European model at all. Is saying that Europe has lots of things that the rest of the world should envy, including, a social structure, a health system, a social welfare, which is great. So inequality is much lower in Europe than in the US, for instance. Life expectancy is much higher in Europe than in the US. And something like this, which is something to be cherished. And I agree with that. However, is also pointing to a long-term decline in productivity and growth, which is worrying, because if this low productivity and lack of growth continues, then that European model of coexistence is put at risk, and we cannot afford that any longer. So it's calling for a reshuffle of a lot of economic levers in the European context in order to bring back that growth that eventually then can create the resources to keep our European model of social welfare, health, education, etc., etc. So this is something that has to be said up front. So he's not criticizing Europe at all. He's saying, let's do something, because otherwise the whole system may collapse. And I agree with that. Another point, which is perhaps obvious in theory, but very important in practice, is saying that the biggest asset of Europe is the single market. There are 27 member states. Economically, this is 500 million people. It's an economic bloc that, outside of China, would be the largest economic bloc in the world. It would be even bigger than the United States. And the single market is something that we have to build upon, and we said it for many years, but we haven't achieved it yet. So it's pointing to lots of things that can be changed, which will not be part of my talk because it's not my expertise, but they're very important. So he's saying there are still 27 member states, 27 different regulations, 27 national interests, and despite the attempts from Brussels to achieve a single market, we are not yet there. So there is a political problem which is quite central, basically, of devoting somehow power to a centralized entity in Brussels that individual member states may not accept. So there is a big struggle there. But if you don't solve this tension, you cannot then leverage the size of the single market in a good way for Europe overall. But it's a problem which is well known. We don't have a very strong political union in Europe yet, and there are very different dispersed interests, and so it's a political problem that has to be solved, and we have to do that, and we can at least trying to uniform regulation, trying to uniform, I don't know, I will talk about telecoms later, but you can imagine spectrum policies. It's not efficient to have national regulators deciding on spectrum allocations that may be inconsistent with each other. Maybe be also subsidies, policies decided by national government that don't fit into a coherent project at the European level. So this is something very important. It's probably the most important thing to do, and to try to unleash this big power that Europe has. Europe is rich. Europe has money, but Europe doesn't manage to coordinate different initiatives in the right way. So there is still a big coordination problem to be solved, but it has to be solved by a strong political leadership, which is not an easy thing to do. Now, another important point of the Draghi report, which is now well understood, and I'm speaking more also to an audience of distinguished competition law experts. Until now, there was a little bit a silos approach in lots of parts of not just Brussels, but generally speaking. So competition policy is one pillar, trade policy is another pillar, and industrial policy is another pillar. So, and somehow those three different pillars didn't talk much with each other. So to give you some examples, when I was in Brussels and we were talking about procurement policies, centralizing procurement policies, the typical response from the competition law crowd in Brussels was saying, yeah, yes, sure, procurement is important because we spend 15, 18% of GDP on procurement. However, this is done by national procurement agencies. It's a national problem. It's not a competition European problem. So, and again, these two different silos wouldn't talk to each other. Instead, Draghi is making the point, if we want to have a coordinated effort at improving the European economy, those three different tools must talk to each other. And I will give you an example in a couple of minutes. And this is important. This is important. It's also important that we talk about industrial policy. Obviously, this is in the aftermath of lots of industrial policy that the United States has been doing in the past years, with the first Trump, with Biden, and now Trump again. Instead, if you spoke to very kosher, very purist competition law economists in the past, and they would hear the word industrial policy, they would say, no. Industrial policy is a bad thing. Let's the market decide. Let's not do that. And so this has become clearly a problem because we found ourselves with COVID, with Ukraine, with the energy crisis. We saw that we hadn't done industrial policy in many segments, and Europe was not resilient at all because it was dependent in some bottlenecks. And when these bottlenecks got broken, then the effects were felt across the economy. So it's also good and refreshing to bring back some tools that we had ignored, at least as economists, we had ignored them. I don't want to make a more general statement. So this is good. So let me tell you an example of what this might mean in practice. Draghi says we should improve, in particular when it comes to competition policy, the tool of state aid. So as you probably know in Europe, or maybe if you don't know, there are three tools that the competition authorities in Brussels are using. One is merger policy. One is antitrust, so behavioral cases against firms abusing other market power, and one is state aid. So it's typically three. So which is maybe peculiar to Europe, I would say, but it's an important one. And also to give you a sense of how relevant it is, during my tenure as chief economist of DG Comp, I would say that not among the economists, but across the organization, 50% of the people were already doing state aid. So half of the structure was devoted to state aid, 1/4 to mergers, and 1/4 to antitrust cases. So it gives you an idea that it's always been quite important. And he's saying, let's do a bit even more of that because it's needed, which is probably okay. Now, when is state aid good and how should you do it? And then I will give you my idiosyncratic opinions about that. State aid is actually good when it unleashes investments that the market would not otherwise undertake. And this is particularly true in instances such as infant industries, for instance. You want to pull them up, or in industries where there are lots of spillovers. And by spillovers, I mean if I invest, sure, I make my product better, but I also give some improvement to my competitors or to other firms, to complementers in the industry. And obviously, I don't monetize on that. So the market incentives are reduced. And instead, so you need to be subsidized in order to do more of that. And this is good. It's a principle which is well understood in economics. That's absolutely fine. You can define also some strategic sectors. In the past, this was understood. However, and again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience, that was the theory. In practice, we didn't do it well, in the sense that often state aid was given to companies reflecting the power of individual member states. So it was not the economic program coming out of a certain initiative, but it was, okay, we decide that we want to have some subsidies in this industry. Let's make sure that Germany, who's the biggest country, gets the largest chunk, followed by France, followed by Italy, followed by Spain. And this was not a good principle, which would exclude the smaller countries because they had less bargaining power. And often, and I saw it, I supervised the first two big cases of an instrument called Important Project of Common European Interest. It's called IPCI. They were on microelectronics and batteries. Often this money was going to these large German firms or large French firms when they had already done the investment. And this is money that actually is badly spent, because instead of crowding in private investment, it would crowd out private investment, because the large German firm would have done that investment anyway, but it was given money from the European side. They didn't have to invest themselves any longer. So we have to be careful to do it well. And I want to give you an example of how I think it can be done well and how it can intersect with other tools, because state aid is industrial policy, but how does it fit with competition policy and trade policy? So let me give you an example which has to do with the green agenda. The green agenda is very important at the European level. We want to promote environmentally friendly technologies for the good reason, because we want to fight climate change. And let me give you some examples. One example is solar panels. So solar panels, Europe has lost the battle in the sense that we are very behind Chinese firms. Chinese firms are super efficient. They invested far ahead of anyone else, far more, and they're just better. And they're fairly cheap. However, in Europe, we don't have an industry producing solar panels. To be honest, we don't. Whereas, if you exception as usual, I'm making just some stark contrast. We don't have an industry, so solar panels on the production side employs very few people in Europe. However, solar panels need to be installed on our roofs. They have to be installed locally. So in the installation of solar panels creates a lot of local jobs. That's a good thing. So in solar panels, you really want to be orthodox, as in the past. You want to have competition as tough as possible on the producer side, making sure that the most efficient solar panels are produced at the cheapest cost. So we, as users, will find it very convenient to have solar panels. That's great. And we will install them. This will induce adoption of solar panels, which is good for the green agenda, and it will create also local jobs in Europe, because maybe these are not high-tech jobs, but still jobs. It will create employment in Europe. So here you don't want to have tariffs on China. You don't want to have subsidies to European firms which are not there. And then you just want to have ordinary competition policy. So competition on the merit, to have a good which is cheap. We are users, but still they are good stuff through the adoption of panels. Now, still in the green side, let me talk about another industry which is different, which is electric vehicles. So electric cars. That's a big industry in Europe. It's a very big industry. It creates a lot of jobs. Sure, there is competition from China. China also has an excellent producer of electric vehicles, or Japan and other countries, but Europe is strong. Maybe not the strongest, but they are up there. They are very close to the technological frontier. It's a key industry for Europe. Car manufacturing is a key industry. Okay, is a key industry. So in that context, it makes a lot of sense to look dynamically over time. If you sustain European firms, if you help them to get closer and closer to the technological frontier, dynamically speaking, these firms, a few years from now, may be at the top of the game. Okay? This creates jobs in Europe, a lot of jobs, so it's a very sensitive industry, and may make these firms, dynamically speaking, maybe, we can relax competition policy now, we can allow mergers in Europe. This concentration of mergers may be not good in the short run because it will increase prices. However, this concentration, but we have to, looking at the data, can create firms that can be sustained in the competition from Japan, China, Korea, etc. And in the long run, they survive. So dynamically speaking, here you do want, if the data at hand calls in that direction, to allow perhaps more concentration in Europe, allow mergers that from a static perspective you would not have allowed. At the same time, you want to have subsidies to these firms. I'll return to this point, how to subsidize them, and perhaps even think about some tariffs. You can play around. You can have 3 tools that you can play around with the prospect of creating, dynamically speaking, firms that can still create jobs and still produce at the frontier in the near future. Now, I said something about tariffs and subsidies. This is, again, a coordination problem of Europe. If you want to subsidize an industry, you can either give money to the companies themselves, or you can give money to consumers adopting a certain technology, for instance, buying an electric vehicle, an electric car. This is where Europe has done lots of mistakes, in my view, because the demand side subsidies, so giving some allowances to consumers like me, has been all over the place. So you have in some countries, countries that give some tax allowances or some compensation or some money, basically, to people to buy an electric vehicle, irrespective of the origin of the vehicle. So this is the lack of the coordination among the instruments. Imagine you are promoting this dynamic theory I'm alluding to, whereby, say, allowing a merger, this will create a stronger European producer and a stronger European champion. Good. But then at the same time, some individual member states are subsidizing demand irrespective of the origin of the vehicle. They're going to buy Chinese vehicles because they're cheaper, okay? And this may completely undo. So you need to coordinate these different instruments. It's quite clear in the example I'm actually giving you. So this is just an example, maybe too simplistic, of how the different instruments can complement each other if you do it well. Sometimes you need to, sometimes you don't have to. So electric panels, solar panels, you don't have to, for instance. There is no reason. Electric vehicles, you might have to, in fact, because the economics is rather different. Here, I want to say a few words, because basically the example of the electric cars is an example of creating an European champion somehow that can sustain competition globally. So let me spend a couple of words here on an example which is always mentioned when it comes to a European champion, which is the 2019 attempted merger between Alstom and Siemens. So Alstom and Siemens, high-speed train producers, proposed a merger. Disclosure, I was a chief economist of DG Comp at the time, so I was involved in that transaction. People sometimes do not know the facts And they think that Europe didn't allow the creation of a European champion by blocking the merger. Now, there was also this narrative that we had to allow the merger because China was invading Europe. Chinese trains were taking over. Okay? And this is typically the argument for the European champion. Chinese are coming, we have to defend ourselves. So there was lots of politics involved. The Minister of Finance of Germany, because Siemens is a German firm, the Minister of Finance of France, because Alstom is a French firm, very powerful in Europe, number one and number two country in the EU, were calling not us at the technical level, but they were calling the commissioner on a daily basis. And there were articles in the newspapers. It became a big thing. So what did we do? We looked at the data, because that's what we typically do as economists, and we looked at procurement data, because these are big contracts. It's not like buying a Coca-Cola in the shop. These are big procurement contracts, which take time. And once you win a contract, it's a contract which is going to last for 10 years. It's a supply of trains or material, rolling tracks for high-speed trains for a long time period. So we looked at all the procurement contracts in Europe for the past 20 years. What's interesting, because they were done by member states, and what's interesting in procurement, as you may know, because this is highly technical material, that you need to be pre-qualified. There is a pre-qualification stage. Then the companies, because it's very expensive to put a technical bid, the firms which are then invited to the second round, they put some extra effort and they put their monetary bid as well. So what we observed in the data is that in the past decades in Europe, not only China had never won any contract. By China, I mean a Chinese firm. It's also turned out that they had never pre-qualified, that they didn't have the right specification even to pre-qualify for tenders in Europe. So the Chinese were nowhere to be seen. Now, I should say that there is always an exception. They had done a small thing in Northern Macedonia. Okay, there was one exception, okay, but this doesn't change the picture. And what's interesting also is that the contracts, the recent ones that were being discussed, were the contracts that would determine the market shares for the next 10 years, okay? Because this is not a spot market. This is a market where you buy in advance. So Chinese firms were not pre-qualified and nowhere to be seen in the past and for the next 10 years. So we said, Chinese, sorry, maybe they're great in some industries, I'm sure, but not in high-speed trains. In Europe, the technical specifications are different and they are not yet there. So we didn't have that. Instead, we had two firms, Siemens and Alstom, which were number one and number two in Europe, number one and number three in the Americas, and also very strong in Southeast Asia. The Chinese market excluded, and some local national markets excluded for technical reasons. But in many other countries, even in Asia, they are super strong. So as somebody said, correctly so, it's not that we did not allow the creation of a European champion. It's because we already had two champions. We had two European champions, and there was no reason for reducing one of them by allowing the merger. Incidentally, exposed, these two companies have done extremely well. So Alstom is very strong. Siemens is very strong in high-speed trains. So it's not that decision destroyed the market and all of a sudden China. By the way, blocking a merger is not an irreversible decision, in the sense that if things change, 2 years down the line, you can re-notify the merger. Instead, if you allow a merger, to undo a merger is much, much more difficult. So I thought it was a very good decision. But as I said, conflict of interest, because I was partly responsible for that decision since we did the economic analysis. The other point in that decision, which we need to talk about, is that the efficiencies. So as you know, in a merger, once you say that the merger is anti-competitive, you throw the ball back to the companies that may tell you, no, there's going to be countervailing effects. These efficiencies are going to be wonderful. Now, we were suspicious of efficiencies. And why am I suspicious of efficiencies in this particular case? Because efficiencies obviously exist. Economies of scale exist. But at some stage, think from the technological engineering point of view, they stop, they exhaust. So sure, super small firms are inefficient. They grow, and then they reach a minimum efficient scale. These companies, though, merger, were already the largest in the world, were already among the biggest. So how on earth could they unleash even further economies of scale since they were already so large? But we asked them, show us. They didn't make any engineering argument. They didn't even try to say that by growing even bigger, they would have become more efficient. They made two arguments. These are all in the document, so I'm not telling you anything confidential. And the arguments were very superficial, if not silly. One argument was, currently, one of us is producing only single-decker trains, one deck. And another of us is producing double-decker trains, okay? If we merge, combined, we will be producing double-decker trains. And we said, okay, how is that different from now? Why is that an efficiency? That was the first argument that we said we don't see any efficiency there. The second argument was actually, in a sense, even funnier. They said to make a bid in a procurement, because it's a technical exercise, is very expensive. Bidding costs are high. Okay, so to prepare a contract, you may not win it. We spend maybe millions. Okay, fine. Maybe several millions. And they said, if we merge, instead of having to put two bids, we will put only one and we will save money. And we said, hold on, this is part of the problem, okay? This is a problem. It's not an inefficiency. So this was were the efficiencies. So if somebody in public seminars keeps repeating Alstom Siemens, at least you know the facts, make your own view, your own opinion, but this is where we were, and that's why we blocked the merger. Now, people may ask, would you have blocked the merger in 2025? I don't know. The economics would have told me, yes, still block, absolutely. I don't see, maybe Chinese firms now are much closer to us. I don't believe so. But of course, I would have changed my view if these Chinese firms were much more potentially competitive in Europe. But in the absence of that potential threat, I would not have changed. But the political climate has changed for sure. The political climate has changed. And this is where I want to go to my last 5-8 minutes of sharing a little presentation I have, if I may. Let me try to see if I can do that. Share this one. Okay. Let's see. I froze. Oh, no, I'm not frozen. Can you see this?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I want to speak specifically about telecoms. Because telecoms is one of the industries that Draghi specifically referred to. And in particular, quite explicitly, I should say, although there is a debate, is saying that consolidation helps. Consolidation helps in telecommunications. So he said that. By the way, again, also here, this is a topic where I have spent 25 years of my academic career. And also disclosures, I'm not doing, or I did not do consulting, neither for companies, not for regulators on this, okay? But I actually have written a lot out of my academic job on competition and consolidation in mobile telecommunications specifically. So as I said earlier, the Draghi report is a new Bible. There is no roundtable that doesn't refer to it. Like the Bible or the Holy Scriptures, there is now a whole industry of people which are giving an interpretation of the Holy Scripture. So we are interpreting what is said. My view is that is calling quite explicitly for consolidation at the European level. Now, what type of consolidation is subject to a debate, but I have views on this. So consolidation can be across markets. So say a German firms who want to enter France and do this kind of cross-border merger. By the way, I don't think there would be any impediment coming from competition law to that kind of merger nowadays, or within countries. So a merger in Germany who wants to merge with another firm in Germany, or France with France, or Italy with Italy. Now, on this topic, I have written a policy report back in September with Tommaso, Massimo Motta, who was my predecessor as chief economist of the EU, and Martin Peitz. And from the title, you already can see what we think. So Draghi is right on many issues, but is wrong on telecom. So this is where I said up front why I think I'm going to tell you some criticism, or specifically on mergers and telecoms mergers. Now, let's have really only 4 slides here. So why would scale matter? As I was telling you 5 minutes ago, obviously economies of scale matter from an engineering point of view, but there are also these economies. So imagine if everything was just leading towards more and more consolidation. Paradoxically, the Soviet Union should have been the most efficient country in the world because they were concentrating all the activities of production in one company, okay? Obviously, economies of scale have a natural limit. There were lots of problems in the Soviet Union, of course, but also when you have these super large firms that become bureaucracies, you don't know how to make decisions. There are lots of inefficiencies coming from scale, so there is a trade-off. So, sure, again, it's very natural to say we cannot expect minnows, but at some stage, technology tells you, okay, that's all right. So in Europe, these are 2 European countries. We have some countries which are very large, such as Germany. Germany is really a big country in terms of population and also in terms of geography. And then we have very small countries, such as Cyprus. Cyprus is an island, okay? And it has very few inhabitants. So if everything was led only by economies of scale, you would expect Cyprus to have prices which are 10 times higher than Germany. Instead, prices are comparable. They're very similar. So we have to be a bit skeptical sometimes of this engineering narrative. Of course, let me say it again. It's obvious, but let me say it again. Economies of scale matter. You cannot have a mobile operator with 10 customers, but once you have 1 million customers, 2 million customers, you do reach an efficient scale, and then everything else is slightly different. So we're a bit skeptical. So talk to the engineer, but don't make extrapolation going always in the same direction. At some stage, economies of scale stop. They exhaust in economic terms. Now, this is also another obvious point. Let's think about technology, because everything is led by the underlying technology. Telecoms, in general, require infrastructure to be installed in close physical proximity to the customer. So it's not an industry where you would expect a single market from a producer point of view. It's different from steel, say. Steel, scale matter, you can concentrate the production in a few steel plants and then you deliver steel where it is needed instead of having lots of... But this is not telecoms. I cannot produce all the telecoms in Germany and then sell them to the south of Italy or to the north of Finland. You need infrastructure in the south of Italy and in the north of Finland. So this is, again, another technological reason why scale and this scalability of the single market reaches a limit, of course, because it's infrastructure is infrastructure. Infrastructure is local. There are small examples which are different, the cloud, etc. But this is not changing the general picture. You still need a cell. You still need a cable coming to your premises. And also here, the comparisons that were made also in the Draghi report were comparing the number of European operators to the number of American operators, which is a strange comparison. But even if I want to take that comparison, if I look at the size of operators in Europe, the 3 largest operators in Europe, which are Telefónica of Spain, Vodafone of different owners, but there is mainly UK, and Deutsche Telekom, Germany, they are larger than the US counterparts. And why is that? Because many of these firms are successful and they are in other international countries. So Telefonica is very big in South America. Deutsche Telekom is in the United States. Vodafone is everywhere. So in terms of total number of customers, they're actually larger than AT&T and Verizon, which are basically limited to the US. So maybe this is not the scale that Draghi had in mind. So maybe it's only the European scale. If I look only at the European scale, again, these top three companies, Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, and Vodafone, they have in excess of 100 million customers each, which is fairly similar to AT&T and Verizon. So it cannot be this, because the customers are a bit in Germany, a bit in France, they're scattered around. So maybe it's too diverse and too dispersed. So this is why I think that really Draghi is calling for within market consolidation. So although he doesn't say it, he's really saying we should have more concentration in Germany. We should have more concentration in Italy. We should have more concentration in France and so forth. Now, the last slides are what should happen with consolidation in theory. In theory, so if you have two mobile companies joining forces through a merger, what will happen? The theory is quite unambiguous on the price side. Unilateral effects, prices will go up and consumers will lose. What about investments? Because people claim there is a trade-off. Actually, this is another thing which I studied quite into some detail in a different context. That was during the agrochemical merger waves, Bayer, Monsanto, Dow, DuPont. And by studying it, we found out that by and large, okay, there are a few exceptions I can refer to, and a merger has also negative consequences on investment. And why is that? Think of this. Why do I invest as a company? In general, forget about telecoms, forget about agrochemical. I invest because I want to make a better product. And I make a better product because, yes, I can ask for higher prices, but by making a better product, I will drive away customers from my rivals. Okay, that's why we invest. Monopolists are not well known for having strong incentives to invest because, sure, they invest a bit, but they are, okay, it's Kenneth Arrow called it, Nobel Prize winner, the replacement effect. They're just replacing themselves. Okay? So they don't want to invest, or they don't have strong incentives to invest. Now, if we merge, this idea is, again, unilateral effects is not that complicated. Before the merger, I wanted to invest because I could drive customers away from rivals and my market share would increase. If we merge, this tension is lost. Okay. So after we merge, other things equal, we have less incentives to invest. This is the innovation theory of ARM, which can be relaxed or can be changed. We still have the price effect. Don't forget that the ultimate effect has to be on consumers. Consumers are always gonna lose from the price effect. So if you really want to have a countervailing force, it has to be very, very large from the investment side because you will always have the price effect, which is negative. So what could be the countervailing force? One is efficiencies. The current system allows for efficiencies and efficiency defense. They should tell us because they have better information. It makes a lot of sense that the companies are going to tell us if there is an efficiency reason. We're going to look into it. Or spillovers. Spillovers is what I said actually in the context of state aid. I said it makes sense to have state aid in those circumstances when if you invest, you better get a better product, but then this gives benefits to other firms in the industry. I mentioned complementors typically, and you don't appropriate. And so but in telecoms, where are the spillovers? Again, you have to go from words to actual application. An investment in mobile telecoms is an investment in speed because you have different frequencies, 5G is faster than 4G, or an investment in sales. You have a better coverage. Okay? This is the investments we're talking about. And you have to say, if you invest in a cell, in an extra cell, you're going to get an advantage? Yes, because you have more coverage, you have more speed, and so customers will come to you. Do you have a positive spillover to your rivals? Say, no. No, if you have an extra cell, if anything, you take away customers from your rivals, okay? So unless you do sharing of spectrum, but that's an efficiency, okay? That's an efficiency from the supply side. If you have a faster network, do you get more customers? Yes, that's why you want to have a faster network. You can get a better product. You will get a benefit from it. If you have a faster network, do you confer a positive spillover on your rivals? No, you don't. You take away market share. So I don't see any plausible reason to have a spillover story. Spillover stories and merger efficiencies here to reverse the result can be true in some digital industries. I don't know. We have lots of complementers and the IP is not clear. It's difficult to copyright stuff. This I can see. But in telecoms, I don't see it coming at all. So bottom line, from the theory side, we could say that consumers are going to lose twice from a merger because prices are higher and very likely investments are going to be lower. But this is theory. What about the practice? The practice is that we're lucky and we have a lot of evidence because this debate of market consolidation through mergers in telecoms has been going on for the past 25 years. And that's why I have been studying it, because we have a lot of data. First generation, the analog, second generation, GSM, third generation, UMTS, 4G, 5G. We have a lot of evidence across the world. Here's a paper which I wrote in the early days with Christos Ganakos and Frank Verboven, economists based in Europe too. We analyzed OECD countries over a 13 years period. And this is the headline. This is the average effect. It's the average effect that we find. This is a published and refereed paper. Prices increased by 8.6% on average after a merger. This is the average merger. Prices go up by almost 9%. Investments by existing operators, existing meaning that remain in the market, go up by also removing, say, a 4-3. You remove the fourth player, and the investment of that player is removed. So at the country level, there is no change. There is no change. Okay. So prices go up, investment don't change. If we concentrate, obviously, I'm interested because I am in the European context. If I zoom in at the European-only data, we still have the price effect, and actually we find a negative impact on investment. So investments, even at the country level, go down by a bit. Now, this paper is being cited in this new wave of mergers, which is happening. A merger has been approved in the UK last December. A merger was approved in Spain a year ago. Most likely, Italy will see a new merger proposal soon. So when people were referring to this paper, which has got some traction, would say, oh, yeah, thank you, Professor Valletti, is great, but this is an old paper. Things have changed now. Things have changed. Things are different. Now, there is this report that, interestingly, the European Commission published last June, okay, which has lots of things about concentration, including a very detailed chapter on mobile. They extend our methodology to recent data. Okay, it was published in 2024. And what do I find with this more recent data? Average effect of a merger, prices increased by 7.5%, okay? Not that different from ours. And now they find that after a merger, even existing operators with the more recent data, investments go down. Okay, there is not even so they're even stronger than our result, particularly on the European data. Here's a comment. You are an audience based in Asia, but this report, which has been published, it is in the public domain, has been kind of buried because it came after, just before the Draghi report. And this is orthogonal to what Draghi is saying. It's saying exactly the opposite. And so it is there, it is on our website if you want, but there has been a couple of presentations and that's about it. It's been buried, I should say. But this is the evidence. Now, if you, in Japan, in Korea, wherever you are, in Taiwan, want to do your own empirical work, I would give you my take on this. You have to find good control groups, which is what we do. Okay, it's not just looking before and after because there are so many things which are going on. Another advice is when you deal with investments, don't fall into the trap of looking at last year and this year, investment is lumpy. Okay, investment is not something which comes continuously. There are decisions. These are corporate decisions to make investments up front, and so you need to have a long enough time period to account for this. Okay, because otherwise you may be really comparing apples with pears, and I've seen a lot of that. And because I've seen a lot of that, please don't be fooled by very simplistic analysis. There are a lot of money at stake, a lot of commercial interest to let these mergers go through. And I've seen a lot of advocacy here and a lot of industry reports without disclosures. Okay, so you have to ask for the disclosure, look at the data by yourself, make your own opinion, of course, but there is a lot of bad work around, not published, not refereed, not subject to any control. You don't know where the data are coming from. They're just giving you some pictures which are bad in my opinion. So, but again, these are my idiosyncratic views. So, last things, it's telecoms, but it's important. Go a little bit beyond that. If you're talking about growth, we're talking about productivity. Telecoms and other industries are essential infrastructure in our country. So that's why we need to be very careful, because if we get it wrong, if investments don't happen, if prices go high, every single one of our firms will be at a disadvantage. Okay, there will be negative spillover effects. So if you want to give a competitive edge to your companies, but your companies need telecoms infrastructure, if this infrastructure is expensive, usage will become lower, and the costs of those firms is going to increase. And this is something I know less, but I'm interested in that. It's my own personal interest. I hear, so these corporations, I don't know, in Japan, they are very close to governments. They know how to talk to them. They complain a lot to governments. They go to regulators, and they devote a lot of resources on that. And instead, I think they should devote resources to entrepreneurship, of becoming themselves companies which are really cool. The examples I have in mind are, for instance, data. Telecoms was sitting on data well before any of the big tech companies. Okay? Decades before. We're talking about the fixed telecoms, then the mobile telecoms, etc. They had data. They never been able to do anything with that. They didn't have the culture to understand that there was something new ongoing. Instead, they decided to have closed gardens. They didn't understand that data at the beginning was different. So they got it wrong. They got it very wrong. Vodafone, which used to be the stronger competitor in the world in the early 2000s, has become a very weak company. So why don't we talk about entrepreneurship and corporate control and what these companies are doing? So in managerial innovation, how do these companies think about innovation other than just banging on the door of the regulators to get protected, to have another? So all these historic, I don't know if it is the history that there used to be national state-owned companies that then didn't manage to get into a private market with a certain mentality. But I think this is more central. Understanding why our telecoms companies have not been big innovators is more important than allow further rents to be concentrated through market concentration. But thank you. I've spoken a lot. Apologies, but I hope you found this interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was interesting indeed. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you. So, any comments? Yes, applause. I add my, yeah. Any comments or questions?
I see Thomas.
Okay. Please, because somehow I can't see. Pen. Yes. Please speak.
Thomas, you are on mute. No, the hand is down. No, the hand is not up.
It was actually applause, I think. This clapping hands.
Apologies.
Yeah, yes,
thank
yeah.
you.
So
thank you, Thomas.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So anyone? Good. We are all happy.
Very good.
Okay, Thomas.
No, Thomas. Another Thomas now.
Yes, please.
Yes, many thanks. If no one starts, let me start. May I try you, Tommaso, on one point that really keeps me thinking all the time, and that is a legal starting point. There is an Article 173 in the treaty stating that the European Union can take measures to increase European competitiveness, and that's what the Draghi report is about. But the same article says that this title does not empower the union to take any measure which would lead to a distortion of competition. And when I read the Draghi report, and also when I actually think of this idea that state aid can already be justified if it leads to a crowding in of investment, I don't see how this article has any meaning for our current policies. And there I wonder, basically, as an economist, wouldn't you see any justification for this article and what it provides?
So I'm not a legal expert. Just justification for crowding in investment is what I said earlier. So state aid is great if there are spillovers or nascent industries that have coordination problems. You want to start to give the momentum to that industry so that then the private investments follows. And this is, by the way, what the United States have been doing in a good way. And instead, Europe has not been doing this particularly well, at least with the first two IPCI, which I supervise. Maybe the more recent ones are different. But now it's what is my real concern? My real concern now is what's concern? I observe the political priorities of the Commission and the resources that they're putting on the table. So DG Comp has changed. There is a new commissioner. There will be a new director general very soon. The new commissioner doesn't come from the competition policy kind of tradition. That's fine. She comes from a green agenda perspective. So what's happening de facto is that DG Comp will concentrate most of its staff on state aid, for sure. Maybe for the good thing, Europe has a lot of uncoordinated initiatives, and so maybe putting this under a single hat and single umbrella may be helpful in that respect. But I also observe that they are letting everything go. So this is more for my personal contacts there with friends I still have. They are not enforcing mergers as they used to do. So the political message has been received. In terms of antitrust cases, I mean, we already did so few in the past that that's not a big change anyway. So merger policy was the most important tool, and I see a relaxation of that for sure. A relaxation of that, and I don't think it is a good direction personally, because I mean, I believe in making the European continent more competitive, but you need competitors also. You need that diversity, and you need to make sure that firms can scale up, sure, but then they can scale up if they are small. So you need to concentrate on our startups, sure. So I'm very much in favor of having a concentration on startups, making sure that those startups may remain in Europe rather than being bought by some large outsiders a few years down the line, as we've done until now. But instead, this kind of thing, I don't see a lot of it. And the notification to DG Comp as the large operation, the large concentration operations that should be blocked or at least challenged, and they're not doing that. So politics has changed for sure.
But isn't that a consequence of the Draghi report?
Yeah. Definitely. So, but in general, also, although we didn't talk about it, also in digital, obviously we have DMA, DSA. These are great instruments, but everybody's frozen now. Everybody's waiting for a political direction. What do we do? Do we impose fines? Yes or no? Do we do it? Don't we? And in the meantime, they're backing off. They are not doubling down. On the contrary, they're stepping back.
Many thanks.
Thomas.
Hi. Sorry for the confusion about the raising the
That's
hand.
all right.
Yeah, I'm still pondering the question that is so thoughtful. So you mentioned a lot about the state aid and also the merger policy, and what I wonder right now is about the balancing things between the state aid policy and also the merger things, because it seems to me that from the Draghi reports that state aids they aims to promote more concentration, right? So they put hopefully more investment on that, and then we have the European champion. But the merger policy sometimes maybe it's a skill or it's a tool that I don't want to you grow up too much. So in your perspective, how do you strike the balance between that? Oh, we have the Draghi reports that we need to promote some kind of concentration, but on the other side, we still need more competitions. How do we strike the balance with that? And then the Draghi report didn't say that. Sorry.
So obviously, to be short, I would say if you, through subsidies, create an Airbus type of initiatives, which is to say, investments matter a lot dynamically in a context where there is otherwise internationally a monopolist, which is not European, that would be Boeing. This is money well spent. And you can allow concentration among European firms to get into that direction. That's a good thing. So you can do the subsidies and you can also allow the concentration. In the example I gave you earlier, this could be applicable to car manufacturers of electric vehicles. If instead, that's Alms and Siemens, you already have two European champions, don't give them more money unless you can show that there is Chinese really at the gate, which we don't see yet. But if there is no Chinese at the gate, not Chinese threat, don't give them further money because they have the resources to do that themselves. Actually, they compete against each other, which is great for the European interest. By the way, people who might ask, why on earth would Germany and France support that merger to near monopoly? And that's interesting always to think about it. It's because historically, Siemens never entered France and France never entered Germany. So France and Germany were already monopolized or near monopolized. So the effects on French people or German people was not to be felt. But the other 25 member states would be have been negatively affected. I'll get another question and then unfortunately I have to go. Simon.
Hello, yeah. Maybe a comment or question on the telecoms, on your insights on telecom mergers. I've often, talked about telecom mergers in Japan and in other countries in Asia, and your narrative, which I also bring, often meets resistance. When I cite your studies, go away with your armchair theoretical economics. Everyone in the industry knows that you need a certain level of profitability, a certain level of average revenue per user, ARPU, to make these investments in the next technology. And then they always come, and I must say this is true. So Japan has always had, for a long time, had 3 mobile network operators. So a rather cozy oligopoly. And I've been a student already 20 years ago. Prices were very high. And I noticed this immediately when you travel to Japan. Oh my God, it's so expensive, mobile telecom. So this proves the point of static situation, competition, price competition going down. But on the other hand, the quality, the technological leaps in Japan were way ahead of Europe. The Japanese were watching television on their mobile phones while we in Europe were still SMSing smileys. And the same with Korea. They've had 3 mobile operators, but they've been far ahead in adopting 5G in speeds. And I see this now in Europe. Europe is lagging in 5G in speeds. You're saying, oh, it's entrepreneurs. We have bad entrepreneurs, but that's like blaming culture. This is impossible to pin down. It's an argument that always works, but never works. So it's a really hard argument to make in Japan. The narrative is always, well, we've had 3 operators and it's brought us great quality. Yeah, high prices, but with these profits, with this what they call a healthy level of ARPU that allows us to invest. Now things have changed. Now there's 4 operators and prices have come down, so it's good now also for students. But that's kind of the clash I always get when I bring this narrative.
Right.
How would you respond?
I would respond in the following way. Look at the data. Look at the data, because this narrative has been pushed, especially by American operators. So if we look at the financials, EBITDA, so earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation in Europe and the US, before you take investments into account, is the same. Okay, more or less the same. However, because there is more competition in Europe, then European firms have to put that money into investments. They cannot keep it for themselves. Okay, so European operators are actually investing quite a bit, and so the overall profitability, once you net out the investments, is lower than the Americans. Okay, now if I look at it's again, don't do the mistake of having 2 data points, because there were lots of subsidies in Japan. There were extreme subsidies in South Korea, etc., from the early days. So the speed of development has been different. But if I look in aggregate at long time periods, what's happened on my computer? Can you hear me? Because there's flickering on my computer. If I look at this, which is cells, number of cells, cell density, speed, analysis has been done, and it finds either no effects from concentration, or I can refer it, it's not armchair economics, it's actually looking at the data. Zingales and Thatcher in the United States even find that quality is lower with concentration. Of course, we have to compare not just 2 data points, but longer time series and more points. So you would have to react by showing data at hand that those stories are actually not to be found in the data. It's an imagination, because people are just comparing wrong time points just to espouse a narrative that they've already decided ex ante. So, by the way, the profitability of telecoms operators is not great, but it's not bad either. So can you tell me of one exit from the market in the past 30 years? Can you tell me one firm that failed because they didn't have the money? So this is you have to contrast. Of course, if the telecoms operator are comparing themselves to the Google of this world, to the Facebook of this world, they are greedy and they want to make more, but that's not the appropriate comparison at all. They make reasonable returns on their investments, how it should be. And then if you want to be better, entrepreneurial spirit typically helps. They hate new entrants. In Europe, there is Digi, a Romanian operator. There is Free, a French new entrant in France, in Romania, and in Italy. And they are still surviving and doing very well. And they're very aggressive because there are lots of pockets of rents. But incumbents hate that. They don't want to see the rents even further diminished by competition. But how come? These newcomers, which are smaller, they're more hungry, they can survive and be successful. That's what competition is. So instead, going to the telecoms minister in Japan or any other country and say, it's a game which is always going to be attempted, but I think we as an independent academic should resist that and look at the data, I would say, as an economist.
Good. Okay. So you have to go, I understand.
I do. Apologies.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate it. Is that okay yes, thank you so much. Is that okay for me to include your discussion part? Answers?
With pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your seminar. We enjoyed it so much.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.